Everyone, thanks for coming. We get started. Welcome everyone to the third Parcel B Campfire, starting from zero. So we have Maya Bittner from Pinch and Roxbox, who you all know. I think everyone knows everyone, right? Not to do this. So Zach Brock at Common Networks and Adam Bree from Skydio. And then we've also got, for the first time, a bunch of interns and new grads from the class of 2018. You can stick your hand in the air if you're one of these people. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Or maybe they're definitely here. I saw them. Where did they go? Both. Well, let's do both. Who just graduated in 18? Not Nick Cox. Wow. And who's here interning? Awesome. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, I thought I would start. So yeah, what we wanted to do is I've got a few questions prepared and wanted to kind of cover the topic of what it's like to start a company from nothing, and have a few questions, but really wanted to spend most of the time opening it up to the floor to ask questions. I think yours will be better than mine, but I've got plenty of questions in case people are feeling shy. So yeah, I wanted to start with, I guess, starting with Maya. What were you doing before you were working in startups? It's like a trick question for you.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you want to define startups. What I was doing before I founded a startup was I was looking for a job before I started grad school. And I was going to be a Postmate because I like bicycling. And I thought it was like I can make a little bit of money and I can bike around San Francisco and I can do it for 3 months before I go to grad school. And that's when I met Megan, who was co-founder at Roxbox, and did that.
Right before starting Common Networks, I was backpacker around Europe because my brother had just gone to graduate school and had spent 12 weeks backpacking around Southeast Asia. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said I was really jealous, and I missed my opportunity, and I should have done that when I graduated school. And she pointed out that there's no age limit on backpacking around Europe. But right before that, I was at Square for a long time. I joined when it was about 20 people. I was there for 5 years. It was about 1,200 when I left, which was an adventure, all sorts of ways.
Did you have the idea before you left?
No. Actually, I left. I knew I wanted to start something. I figured I would not think about it for a while. And then actually while traveling, I met up with my now co-founder and his wife who were in Barcelona. And we had terrible internet at the Airbnb we were staying at. And we decided that somebody should really fix that problem.
Before starting Skydio, I was working on Project Wing at Google X, which is Google's drone delivery thing. But I think basically I'd been building autonomous flying stuff for most of my life. It's been sort of a continual obsession. There are people here that can attest to RC airplanes in my dorm room at Olin, things like that. And that was really like what the company grew out of.
So what, a lot of times people ask the question, what's the reason you decided to start your startup? I think Zach had a really good point when we were going through these, that there's usually more than one. So what are your top 3 reasons for starting your startup?
For me, I mean, the reason I like being a founder is, one, I'm kind of a generalist. I'm not particularly good at any one thing, but I'm pretty decent at a lot of different things. And I think being a startup founder is a really good role for that because you need to dive into different areas, whatever's a problem, and you need to be able to be good enough at things to hire people better than you. And so I'm pretty good at hiring people who are better than me in lots of different areas. And then, so it's 1, generalist. 2, I'm bad at following directions. And 3, I feel like I've always done this. I don't know.
1, especially after leaving Square, I'd seen 20 to over 1,000, and I was really interested in what came on either side of that. It's like, what does 0 to 20 look like? And then what does like 1,000 to 10,000 look like? That way, it's easier. One reason is because I could. Like I had and have like the background.
I'm listening on the Nexi.
Someone's Amazon had
Yeah, it's live streamed.
There is a live stream, but I didn't think they could ask questions. If you can hear us, say hello. Might be okay.
Yeah.
One of the many things you're good at.
Hanging up on my
Terminal.
The second reason was I could. Like, I have the background and the skill set to actually like start and run a company, and like I'm pretty good at a lot of things. Another reason is like I actually really like the process of going from like 0 to 1. Like I like identifying a problem. I like figuring out how to solve it and what the constraints are and what's like the minimum viable product in the world. Doing a startup, you get to do that over and over again, actually. It's not just the first product you build, it's every subsequent thing along the way. And I guess I've actually got a fourth reason, which is looking at like the risk profile of things that I could do next. There's I think currently a market inefficiency if you are capable of starting a company and raising venture capital, that joining a venture-backed company is actually not the right thing to do. Because the risk-reward ratio is all out of whack unless you're a Series B company. And so if I wanted to do something early, I was going to have to start it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, picking three, so I really love working with Abe and Matt, who are my two co-founders. Like, Matt was the first person I met when I was moving into the dorms at Olin. Abe was my lab mate at MIT, and they're just two of the like hardest working, smartest people like I'd ever gotten to work with. And so when the opportunity to do something with them came together, like that was definitely a huge component. I was super excited about the idea when we came to it. Like, you know, I love building autonomous flying stuff, and doing that in a way that opened up these new creative possibilities was really exciting. And then also working at Google, I found to be kind of a frustrating experience. Like, Google's not very good at building drones. Sergey thought drones were cool. So I'm going to kind of badmouth Google here, but Sergey thought drones were cool, which is why they were building drones. But basically, I just thought we could do a much better job of it on our own, and decided to do that.
So as a way of giving a little bit of an overview of your companies, if you sort of had to break down kind of the story of your company into eras, like say like 2, 3, 4 eras, something like that, what would they be?
I
Do we
can,
have reverse order?
right.
We do reverse order first every time.
Yeah, we can do reverse order.
Yeah, not go
Okay,
first
thanks.
every time.
I need help with the moderating thing.
So I think one was definitely like founders in a basement time. It was just the three of us for about 9 months, self-funded, basically like writing the core of the tech stack and spending a lot of time thinking about like where we wanted the product to go and talking to potential customers and just sort of like navigating a lot of the early questions. And that was definitely the like most stressful, hardest time because there's just so much uncertainty and so many unknowns, and it's unclear if like anybody's ever going to care about this thing that you're working on like 20 hours a day. And so that was definitely one chapter. I think the next one was when we raised the seed round and built kind of the core team that ended up building enough of a foundation to have a very crude functional prototype. So it's important, like we have very different flavored startups here. Like our thing is kind of like a hardware, hard tech thing. So it's a much longer development time and product cycle.
Maybe we should explain what we do.
Yeah. Do people know what? So we just launched 2 months ago our first product, which is a fully autonomous drone. So it's a complete hardware software thing. It has a bunch of cameras on it. It runs a bunch of AI. But the end customer experience is very simple. It like flies itself. It follows people. It avoids obstacles. It takes cool video. And we view that as really like the starting point for a platform that can enable a bunch of autonomous flight applications. So like the core capability is just being able to move an image sensor around in 3D using software. which we think is a really general, powerful thing in the long term. So that's basically what we've been working on since the beginning. So getting back to the chapters, there was like the founders in the basement time. There was the core software team, mostly software, building a functional prototype. And then there was kind of like full hardware product development, where we had to build out a hardware team and start doing supply chain and manufacturing. And then I think the most recent chapter of actually having the product in market. And each of those has their own challenges, but I think kind of the way it has to, like each one sort of sets the stage for what comes next. And a lot of the lessons between them, I think, transfer pretty well.
Yeah, so we're building, Start Common Networks, we're building a better, faster, cheaper way to get people on the internet. Fundamentally, what we've solved is a way to deliver fiber-class internet to homes for a fraction of the cost of running fiber. So fiber was always the great promise of how people are going to get next-generation broadband, but it turns out it is wildly too expensive to actually bring to most of the country. So we do it with wireless point-to-point links and a combination of microwave and millimeter wave radios. We build effectively a neighborhood mesh, and then we've written a bunch of software-defined networking stuff to turn all that into reliable internet for people. And so as a result, we can get people online at gigabit speeds for hundreds of dollars per home instead of thousands of dollars per home. And we think this is how the next generation of broadband is going to get rolled out broadly, both in the US and around the world. To break it down into chapters, the beginning was, can we make this thing work? Like, we had the idea, we'd written a product plan, and we had to figure out whether or not we could actually get people online that way. And yeah, it's like trying to figure out whether or not the thing you're working on is the right thing and you're heading in the right direction is really stressful, because you don't have a lot of feedback, and you're like, well, we'll find out in a year if we're heading in the right direction. But the first year of the company was, does this concept work? Can we actually get people online in the real world? Can we deliver great internet to folks? And then the next year was, okay, cool, we got a couple dozen people online. Can we actually scale the operations of this? Can we get hundreds of people online a month? Can we hire installers? Can we actually operate a network at scale? And can we figure out like a model that will eventually work to rubber stamp across multiple markets? So the way that we will scale is by going and launching a bunch of markets across the US. And then about 6 months ago, I think we kind of moved into the third chapter, which is, okay, cool, technology works. And like Adam said, like, you always have to do the previous things, which is annoying. Because like, just when you think you've solved them, you get to move on to something else, you still have to do the first things really well. But the most recent chapter is, the technology works, the operations works, we can actually get people online, we can give them a great experience. Now, like, let's make sure the business model is going to work. We have something we can throw a lot of cash at really quickly and scale up. And that's kind of what we solved most recently, and what we're working on going forward. So we're building our hardware too. Building hardware is a pain in the ass. I don't recommend it. I've done it in 3 companies.
So at Roxbox, which was jewelry rental, did not have that kind of hardware. And the stages of the company really map pretty neatly to the fundraising stages. So we had what would now be called pre-seed, but which wasn't a term at the time. We'd raised about $400K, and that was the first year and a half of the company, which was brutal. And it was really like a time of no resources. It was like, what can we get done with no money at every stage? And it was also a lot of fun stuff. Because we were running so close to the edge, like, that's where, we would get a sudden surge in signups and literally not have jewelry for them. And we would go to Nordstrom Rack and buy jewelry and mail it out to people. And we were like, here's your stylist curated selection of jewelry.
Here's what was on the sale rack at Nordstrom Rack.
I just got this at Nordstrom Rack. And then we had actually given, and we were trying to raise our seed round the whole time. And we finally gave up. We were like, I guess it's not going to happen. And that week, so we were like, it's not going to happen. We've always done things our ways. We make some revenue. We're just going to make this work. And that week, we raised our seed round, which was a $1.5 million round led by Matrix. And so from there, we really scaled things up. And we got to do things like order 100,000 boxes at a time from China and have real deals and payment terms with designers. And ramp things up to a scale. And it's funny because at this stage, I would often get very scrappy people with no resources coming and asking for, they're like, oh, I see that you use influencers. I want to use influencers on Instagram to market my product. And I would say, yeah, I'm like, we invite 3,000 people per month to be Roxbox influencers. Like, I don't think you understand the scale and the funnel of this process. Like, it works really well for us, but we have one full-time person who only manages the Instagram influencers, and that's what she does 60 hours a week, is works with the Instagram influencers. Then we tried to raise our A round, could not do that. Someone offered to acquire us, and so we went down that process, and we had a whole, no sale agreement and couldn't talk to anyone. And an investor was like, you shouldn't sell. I'll lead your A round. And so we did that. And that was fun because we got to hire in a whole team of executives. So I was a CTO. I hired in a VP of engineering. I'd also been running operations, so I hired in a VP of operations who had done this before, and like really got people who don't have the same risk tolerance that I do, but who could come in, build teams, lead them, and do them much better. Because of my experience at Roxbox, and a lot of the early stage companies I see, I always say like the hardest problem in startups is finding product market fit, finding something that really resonates with people and captures consumer attention. I think you guys show that like actually if you're doing hardware, like the tech is kind of hard too. And that's what we have at Pinch as well. So at Pinch, we're trying to help Americans with their finances, and it's a regulated industry. So there's the whole product market fit half, which is you have to find something that consumers are excited about and it's meeting a need in their lives. And then you also have to make sure it's possible given either technology constraints, or in our case, we're actually dealing with a lot of regulatory constraints and partnerships with credit bureaus and things that are outside of our control. And so Pinch is very early. We just closed our second pre-seed round. I also learned is an option. And we launched our product January 1st. So there's actually Pinch trade lines showing up on people's credit reports. We report rent payments so that people can build their credit by paying their rent. And we are just wading our way through that regulatory and growth situation now.
I'm going to ask one more background question and open it up. So what is something that surprised you and something that didn't? Two things, one surprising, one unsurprising. Who wants to take it first? Zach came up with this question, so I feel like you should.
I know, I feel like I should have had a better answer. I can do the unsurprising one. I'm thinking about the surprising one.
I can do the surprising one. I think this is just sort of like a general thing, probably, of like working at companies and like meeting more people. But I certainly think, like through Skydio, I've been super fortunate to get to meet, and we have investors and advisors who are like on the executive team at Apple during the comeback years, and like people who have done incredibly impressive things. And talking with them, like most of them are like super smart, and it's not surprising that they are where they are. But this sort of impression that the people who are on top of these things like know all the answers and know what's going to happen like completely evaporates. And you realize like how much you realize like how much even at the highest levels of like the biggest, most successful companies, there's smart people involved, but there's also a tremendous amount of uncertainty and trying like huge things that don't work at all. And I think in a lot of ways that's like a sort of heartening thing when you're working on an early stage startup. The thing that was not surprising, I would like pick a positive thing. I mean, I think I expected it to be super fun getting to like build autonomous stuff with a great team, and that has been super fun and continues to be super fun. So there's a lot of things that are like less fun, but that is awesome.
Something that was unsurprising. So I feel like, especially talking to other folks that have started companies around the same time, I feel like a lot of the stuff around hiring, recruiting, managing, building a team was thankfully really unsurprising, because I've helped a lot of people who really struggled with this early on. I got really lucky. Like I got to basically jump in the deep end with infinite backup support at Square. because they just handed me a team about 6 months into the company and were like, good luck. By the way, here's some people to talk to. And so I managed a bunch of engineering teams and got to grow teams from 0 to 30 people and hired probably like 80 or 90 people in the time that I was there. And so it was really nice to have that muscle memory and not have to learn that stuff on the fly while also trying to figure out product market fit and how to build hardware and all the other things you have to do. I think that's really, if you get the opportunity to be a manager, I think it is a really important skill set to practice before you start a company, because learning it while you're starting a company must really suck. Something that was surprising, I guess I didn't realize how much time I was going to spend in spreadsheets. Like I got to write a lot of code the first basically year and a half of the company. And now my whole life is spreadsheets and models and finance and talking to investors and hiring people and all the other things. So I knew that was going to happen, but I guess I still held hope that we get to write some code at this point.
So one of the surprising things, this is between Roxbox and Pinch, is that hiring was shockingly easy at Roxbox. Because there are a lot of people who are really excited about jewelry. And the jobs at Roxbox are worse in every way than at Pinch. There's longer hours. We paid less than half what we paid. It's like everything about the jobs was worse. And most of the jobs we hired for, so we had about 60 people on our team who only cleaned jewelry in a basement in San Francisco, right, for minimum wage. And it was so easy to hire. I mean, we would just go like this, and we would have 10 people show up that day. We could say we need 10 people to show up in an hour and a half, and they would be there and they would clean jewelry, and people were so excited. And so I was like, oh, this is how it is to hire people. Is you need someone and they're there. You need an engineer, they're there. You need a designer, they're there. Pay people minimum wage, they're excited. They're going to work a long time. Jewelry's really fun. And then I was like, oh, I'm building a regulated financial services company.
What could be more exciting than that?
Right. So, and at Pinch, our team is much smaller at Pinch. So we have, it's an amazing team. It's top-notch people. Like I said, it's a great job. But we're 6 or 7 people. And we're not looking to grow now, but certainly hiring at Pinch was we would put up a job posting and then nothing would happen. And I'm like, I don't understand where all the people are who are knocking down my door to come work at this company. So that was really interesting to discover how much the industry affected hiring. I was very wrong about that. And then, I think kind of playing off what you said with writing code, but I think at the later stages of Roxbox, it felt like I wasn't doing anything because it's you would come and you would do meetings, and even in the meetings, you're kind of asking questions and trying to bring resources to people and make sure that your team, has the ability to go build things and have ownership and lead things, and you give them the right resources and you point them in the right direction, and then somebody left the toaster on and it melted the kitchen cabinet and you deal with that. And it's you just kind of run around and deal with things, and then you go home and I'm like, what did I do today? I just sort of asked people questions in meetings and then rerouted emails to other people and then dealt with a melted cabinet, And so it's kind of weird. It's when you're being successful in that way, it's a little bit unsatisfying.
Cool. So thought I'd open it up for questions from the audience.
Ben?
That's why I didn't recognize you. Cool. We've got a couple people from Minerva, right? Minerva people want to raise your hands? If you don't know about Minerva, you can ask them and or Avery.
So for me, I want to start my own company eventually, but a lot of times you come up with ideas and they turn out, and you have convictions and they turn out to be pretty wrong. I want to hear about your failures to make me feel better, basically. But also because I think it's good to recognize the times that you failed and realize that you can't just go out and start a company and succeed. It doesn't work that way. So I'm interested in hearing what your strong convictions were that were just completely wrong applied to other companies you tried to start.
I think the way I thought about it going into it was the most important thing is to pick the team you want to work with, because the people are what's going to determine your day-to-day happiness, and it's the people that you want to spend a lot of time with for the next few years. The next thing is to pick the industry that you want to tackle, and the last thing is to figure out what the product you actually want to build is. Because I think that's in kind of decreasing order of difficulty to change. And so if you are if you're in a great industry, but you kind of have the product wrong a little bit, you can kind of iterate towards something that makes sense. If you've got a great team, but you're in the wrong industry, you can always pivot into something else. But recreating the team from scratch sucks. So trying to avoid doing that one. But I don't think I'm going to guess here, but I would expect that there is, I mean, you mentioned 9 months of trials and tribulations figuring out whether or not this thing was heading in the right direction. I felt that way too. I felt like,
well, I would say, I mean, we're still way too early to declare a success. So
yeah.
it could be this.
But
I mean,
I was just gonna say, you spend a lot of time early on. There's no moment where you're I got it. This is the thing we're gonna do for the next 5 years. It's okay, well, things kind of seem like they're working. We'll try this for a little bit, and then a year later, you're I guess this is what we do now. Stuff's still working. Keep going. And along the way, you've made lots of mistakes and branching paths, and tried things and canceled them and done other things. But I don't think there's a moment when it really clicks. Except maybe, I don't know, fundraising. When somebody writes you a big check, you're I guess we did something. Cool.
I think I tried to, fail fast is a phrase that people say, but that's what I really tried to do, in particular at Roxbox. And one of the things at Roxbox, people are always complaining about it taking too long to get their jewelry in the mail. And this was actually probably most of my blood, sweat, and tears was this we worked with DHL, UPS, FedEx, USPS, and we had this whole algorithm based on where you lived and the time of day and all these things, so how you would get your box as fast as possible. And did a bunch of interesting things with your return box as well. So yeah, I have a minute, but one of the things is I was everyone's always complaining about it. We are going to do same day delivery in San Francisco, which I'm going to test by living out my Postmate dreams and running around office buildings in San Francisco delivering Roxbox shipments, which I did. And so that was the idea I had, and it super didn't work. Everyone hated it. They were this is too fast. I wanted to get a break. Everyone wants their Roxbox in 3 days, and it's the people who have it in 5 days that are complaining. If you send it to them in 1 day, they also don't like it. So I just I literally just grabbed shipments out of the pile and took them to office buildings in downtown San Francisco. And then I emailed them, and I was hey, your Roxbox came in a different way today. Did you notice anything? What do you think? And I talked to them. So I just found out right away that it didn't work, and no engineers were involved, no ops changes, just kept as minimal as possible. And then I had a bunch of ideas that did work out well, right? I was oh, we're going to do, my favorite feature at Roxbox is so you can comment on an Instagram photo, and then you'll get that piece of jewelry in your next box, which was one of the things I'm this is going to be a really magical experience. Nobody else does this, all this stuff. And we did the same thing where I was what is the zero engineering way to test it? And once that looked good, I was okay, we're going to do a little bit more investment to the next stage. And when that looked good, we did a little bit, and we did all these things until the whole system was automated and it was this huge project. But yeah, I think it's usually I don't have oh, we spent 4 years and $10 million and it was a catastrophic failure, because it's you try and inch your way towards success.
Yeah, I think you nailed something really important, which is to actually get feedback from people. I think that was one of the things that I think we did a good job of eventually, and definitely made a mistake on for the first few months, which is oh, we'll just build all this stuff and people are going to love it. And then it's only when you actually ship it, you're oops, it turns out it's missing a bunch of important features, and that's the reason why people aren't using it. So you have to get stuff out in the world and get real user feedback. It's always scary. You want to keep iterating on it and polishing it, but it's actually better to get something out there sooner.
How do you get feedback from the users who don't like your product, stop using it, and then
go talk to them. Go talk to them.
Okay.
Figure out some way to talk to them. I mean, for us, it was early on. We stood in Safeway and just interviewed random people. We're what do you like about your internet? They're leave me alone. But yeah, I don't think there's a shortcut to it.
Well, you know where they live, so you could just knock and be why did you cancel comment?
What the hell? Back. No, I mean, I think when you the product market fit idea is kind of elusive, but it is when you hit it, you'll see like all your metrics start making sense. Like your conversion funnel looks great. You can just kind of like do the math on the financials and be like, yep, this business works now. And if you haven't gotten there yet, then like you got to keep working on it. Like find every possible channel of feedback you can.
Yeah, I would try to convert every person that I met to be a Rocksbox customer, either for themselves or for their mom or someone they're dating. Or I'm like, you got to know someone who wears jewelry, and you can buy Rocksbox, right? And so when I tried to convert every person I met, most people say no. But you learn a lot, and I think it's easy to discount the reasons why people say no, but often they're accurate. Like a lot of people said they're like, oh, I'm really picky about the jewelry that I wear. I couldn't have somebody else pick it out for me. And so it's like, oh, cool. Like they don't trust that we can pick jewelry that they're gonna like. How do we build up the trust that like we can pick jewelry that we like, that we're collecting enough information from them, or that our inventory is good enough, or whatever, to like address that problem. So yeah, I would try to convert everyone.
Eric?
So, like, at the point you sort of dove in and started doing it with, like, your co-founders, what was it that convinced you that that was, like, the perfect founding team for what you're doing? And looking back, were you right? Was that the perfect founding team?
You should probably expect party line answers on, is it the right one?
Or, like, what factors are you thinking about in what makes that founding team right?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky. So with Rocksbox, I worked with Meg as the first employee for 2 or 3 months because I was going to grad school. Before she was like, you should bail on grad school and be my co-founder. So I had already worked with her for months. And I knew that we worked really well together, and that we had a lot of the same values, and that there were like a bunch of pieces in place. I think it would have been hard to know that. It would have been hard to, like, I think how people respond under stress and under pressure is something you really want to find out. Some people double down and become twice as much as they normally are, while some people retreat in the other direction. So like if somebody's normally really detail oriented, they might get super detail oriented, or when they're stressed out, they might like get really sloppy all of a sudden. And so I think it's good to find like what direction people move in when they get stressed out. But yeah, I got to work with Meg for months, and then Ducker and I chose to do a startup together. He was like my best friend for 10 years from college, right? And we chose each other like so much more than an idea or anything else. It was like, oh, we are going to do something together. And it probably is going to be a startup, but maybe it's traveling around the world. You know, like we were about each other, and then it was like a startup.
Yeah, I think working with people is the best way to tell. Like, so our founding team, there are 4 of us, myself, Mark, who's our CTO, Grace, who's our head of product, and Jess, who's our COO. And all 4 of us actually work together at Square in different configurations. I had hired Mark onto my team when we were building Square Japan. Grace was the PM on that team, and the 3 of us spent basically 3 months flying to Tokyo over and over and over again. And you really get to know somebody when you're like, only been in Tokyo for 2 days, you're getting back on a plane to come back to San Francisco, and you haven't slept in like 36 hours. And then Mark started and ran external platform and APIs at Square with Jess, who is the head of business development. And so they worked together super closely for a couple of years. Jess and I worked together on a project. Grace and Jess worked together on a project. Like, we'd all worked together enough to know what we were getting into, and to know like how people behave under stress, and how we behave together under stress, and where we like push each other's buttons, and where we like support each other. And I think for the kind of stuff that we're doing, we needed a lot of scrappy people across a bunch of different domains, because we had to build hardware and software and a whole operations platform and team. And yeah, I think I'm not sure that it would have succeeded without all 4 of us, or at least as successful as we are so far. Ask me again in the year.
So I mean, I said this a little bit initially, like Abe and Matt. Matt I knew from undergrad super well, and Abe was my lab mate at MIT, and I just like I knew they were both incredibly talented and hardworking, and had seen them do amazing things, and like just had a lot of confidence that working, like the 3 of us together, there was at least a lot of potential. I will say that there was, especially in like the first few months, there was a fair amount of like chaos and us figuring out how to actually work together, because Abe and I were grad students at MIT, and then we were together at Google, and we just like, we knew how to do things together. Like we'd been doing it for 5 years in different contexts, and we had a way of like, you know, all this is technical stuff. We just like knew how to split up problems and the way we like to do stuff. And Matt was coming from like mobile gaming world, and like it was a completely different thing. Plus he's kind of crazy anyways. Yeah, Matt is Danny's manager. And like ultimately the bet for the company was that like putting together the sort of like autonomy, computer vision, navigation stuff with the creative things that we thought Matt could bring to bear was going to be really powerful. And I think that really has worked out. I think that's one of our real strengths as a company, but it took a lot of like, I don't know, it took a lot of work to get there. And there was definitely a lot of like arguments about all kinds of things. And I think that, this is a very common piece of advice, but I think it's really important to have those arguments and to like take some frustration and pain and like offend each other to get on the same page. Because if the founding team is aligned, it's incredibly powerful. But if you're not aligned and you start building a team around that, it can, I think, get chaotic quickly.
So what have been the advantages and disadvantages of having your startup in San Francisco?
And or Redwood City.
It's, I ran a fulfillment warehouse out of downtown San Francisco. So it's expensive. We did not have a loading dock. So when I got the 100,000 boxes, the truck driver would be like, "Oh, where's your loading dock?" And I'm like, "Oh no, we don't have one. We're in the basement, but the elevator's broken." And so we would have pallets. We would block the entire sidewalk. Our office was in Union Square. So we'd block it on Sutter Street between Powell and Mason, full of pallets, full of boxes. And then if it would start to rain, we would put trash bags over all the boxes to try and protect them from the rain, and hire the temp workers I mentioned earlier to come carry in all the boxes to our office. So that was a big downside of being in San Francisco. All of our like logistics stuff, all of our like importing things from China and getting jewelry, like all the mail was really brutal. We were mailing boxes to the whole US, and so San Francisco is not a very central distribution point. And it took a long time to get to Florida and Idaho, mostly. Those were our stickler companies, or states. And so, yeah, that, like, having a distribution company that's mailing things out of San Francisco was probably the hardest part of San Francisco for us.
I think I can't imagine starting a company outside of San Francisco because I don't think you can hire the people you need. Like having hired a lot of people at Square and now hired a lot of people at Common, the talent density in the Bay Area in particular and in San Francisco, especially because you have access to everybody in the East Bay and along the peninsula, is just unmatched anywhere else. Like I've tried hiring people in New York and Atlanta and St. Louis, and it's just like it is 100 times easier to find great engineers, marketers, product managers, support people here.
You find that continues to be true as a lot of the bigger tech giants are continuing to grow bigger and creating competition?
Yeah. No, I think you can always steal people away from those companies, and the whole Bay Area is just such a magnet for the kinds of people who like to do this sort of thing that like it is by far the best place in the world to do this. I always like the metaphor I always use for people is like you can make movies anywhere in the world, but if you want to make a blockbuster, you better be in Hollywood. Like you're not going to make a blockbuster movie in Florida. Like you're just not going to convince anybody to move out there for 9 months to do it.
They're trying.
They'll keep trying.
No, they are. Magic Loop. I mean, maybe it'd be like a flop.
Yeah, their relocation benefits are insane though. So.
Yeah. I think this is necessarily like, I think it's mostly a good thing, but people talk about culture for startups a lot. And I think if you really think about it, like the culture of the startup is at best like a sort of modification on the larger cultural context in which it exists, like the culture of our country. And I think that the San Francisco, the Bay Area generally has like cultural elements conducive to startups, like people understand how they work, and they're like willing to take risks, and they know that you have to work hard to make it happen.
Your banker isn't going to question you when you're like trying to explain what your job is.
Right.
Seriously.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a lot of natural supporting elements. But I'm sort of, I think we all have to be cognizant that we do, I mean, I assume everybody here is, well, not everybody here, probably most of us live in the Bay Area. And I think that there is this pretty strong bubble effect, which it's probably hard for, I mean, I've been here for 6 years now or something. It's like very hard to see outside of that. And I think it is worth the like mental exercise of like what might this be like in a different context.
So now that the subject is kind of like the balance here and the number of companies that can also feel important from your company, what are tips for having a company culture where people want to stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about everyone understanding what you're working towards and why, and having a clear mission. I think people buy into the mission and stay for the people. And so if you hire great people, if you have a clear mission, those are kind of the key elements to like solving the recruiting and retention problem.
Yeah, I actually think firing people really quickly helps a lot.
Yeah.
Because it establishes you might be surprised, but it's so effective towards creating like super loyal team. People see, they're like, oh, I see the type of behavior that is approved and that we are as a team, and I see the type of behavior that's not okay at this company. And they're like, your team gets stronger, you get more bought in, people are more motivated when they see that like, oh, you don't get rewarded for slacking off here or for whatever. I think, yeah, that was one of the biggest things that I learned is just fire people immediately, like you did, just as soon as you know. And everyone's happier, you know? It's like, it's really true. If you're not happy working with someone, they're probably not having a good time, and there's a better company for them out there. And so, and your team is going to be happier, like it's just all good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it can take different forms for different companies, but in some way you have to figure out a way to be an awesome place to work. And I think there's probably a lot of different ways to do that. I think like we naturally tend to attract people who just like working on the thing that we're doing, which is kind of unique. And I think that has benefited us a lot, but I also totally agree like that getting to work with smart people and a team where everybody's committed and pulling their weight is hugely powerful. And unfortunately, I think that like firing people quickly is one of the best ways to make sure that you get that.
It's also one of the unique advantages of working at a small company versus a big one. Like the odds that everyone there is super talented and pulling their own weight and sharing the same mission is much higher when you're not at a company of like 30,000 people.
How do you make sure that the pacing for like growing and developing stays on track? Like, do you take a lot from examples, or do you just fire people a lot going through the process and make sure that comes too slow?
I think what
Yeah, it's no such thing.
yeah, like what Zach was saying about product market fit, like all of your metrics start looking good. I think that's what I use to guide me. So if we're like acquiring customers on Facebook and it costs us $100 per customer, I'm like, this isn't working, you know, like cut the Facebook ads, you know, where like the ads are broken or the product's broken or something's not working, because we shouldn't be paying $100 per customer. And then like when you're, I don't know, for a while we were doing giveaways at Roxbox, which like was giving us customers for like 10 cents or whatever. So I was like, everybody gets a free necklace. Like we are doing so many giveaways. Like and we were reaching out to blogs. There are like these blogs that rated different burgers around the country. I'm like, give them a free necklace to do a giveaway, you know? And so it's kind of like evaluated like that, like as fast as you can when it makes sense, and then not at all fast if it's not making sense.
It's kind of a joke that like the first question every VC board member is going to ask you is like, why are we going faster? What can we do to go faster? And like, it's not really a joke because it is literally how most of my meetings start. But it is, I think the question is always just like, what can you do to go faster. And I think the way that you keep stuff on track and make sure you haven't broken everything is to set up good metrics and good goals, and like good check metrics against the things you're doing. So like, you wanna, if your goal is to acquire customers, but you're not checking what your like cost per acquisition is, you can get into trouble pretty quickly.
I guess I'm not, maybe this is interpreting your question a little bit more broadly. I think that it's hard to be, you can't be proactive about everything related to growing. And I think in practice, what ends up happening, and I think what good companies do well, is you like focus on the most important things, then you end up being like intelligently reactive on the other stuff of like, oh, this thing that we were doing that used to work isn't working anymore. We need to like figure out some way to improve it. I think we've been especially delinquent in that in space, where we like run out of office space and then actively add more.
I sometimes describe running a startup to people as like, you have a huge list of things to do, and the top 10 of them are completely on fire, and if you don't solve them, the company will go under, and you ignore everything else until they are on fire. Because if they are important, they will eventually be on fire.
You guys mentioned like firing people. How do you fire people from the team without creating a culture where people are afraid? Or like when that's something that's maybe.
I think you make it really clear like why it doesn't work out with someone, and then you give people lots of feedback on what they're doing, right? So if you're always telling people what they're doing, and then you're like, oh, like this person doesn't work here anymore because they did this other thing, and you tell someone like, but you're doing this in your weekly one-on-one or whatever it is, I think that helps make people feel better.
Yeah, I think in the situations where you do have to fire somebody, you're usually not the only person who thinks it. Like everyone kind of looks around and is like, yeah, I'm glad that person's gone. But I think you're right. Like weekly one-on-ones, like having good feedback loops with employees, making sure people understand when they're doing a good job and when they're not, so it's not a surprise. You don't want people to feel like they should be hearing critical feedback, and it shouldn't be a surprise when you actually fire them. It doesn't always work out that way. Some people are very good at deluding themselves, but you should aim for that, I think.
I mean, I've had people ask me that question directly, like, oh, saw like these folks got let go, like, am I at risk? And I think if you have a really good performance review process, and you can like speak really honestly about like, hey, you know, you would know we're doing these one-on-ones, you know where you're at, like you don't need to worry.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on that, like the team will see, I mean, we very early on, one of the first people we hired just wasn't working out, and we let him go. And it was definitely like the team was small enough that it was kind of a family feel, and it was definitely like a tough thing for everybody. And I'm not sure at the time, the people who were working closely with him, I think, got it and probably thought it was the right thing to do. But it was very clear, like a week afterwards, that we were just much better off. And so ultimately, like if you're making good decisions, I think people are smart and they see it and they get it.
Yeah, no worries.
So I'm like I mean, this relates to what we're doing, and I might be on one extreme of this, but I mean, a lot of what we're doing, and I think a lot of why it's fun and cool, is that it ties together a lot of really hard engineering challenges. There's like thermals and aerodynamics and three-dimensional geometry and like all sorts of math for solving it. And so I actually like really still use a lot of stuff that I learned in like foundational undergrad engineering classes, which is probably not common for a lot of people. And I don't use it now to like do a lot of it myself, but I use it to like sort of think high level about product trade-offs, and ask people tough interview questions and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think the best thing I learned was communication skills, how to break down a problem and talk about it with somebody and get what was in my head into somebody else's head. I think this is probably not the answer they'd prefer me to give, but the place that I learned this the best was playing World of Warcraft. So Lee and I were had a rating guild in college.
Back when it was hard.
Back when it was hard.
Easy now.
But we were running 40-person rating guilds with like a bunch of random ass people we'd met on the internet, and so you're coordinating like 50-something people to like get together and do something for 3 or 4 hours a night, 4 nights a week.
Stop wanding the dragon.
And everyone has to perform their like it's basically it was like a crash course in like management. It was like and leadership. Like how do you set a goal? How do you explain to people what they need to do? How do you delegate responsibility? How do you get a team working together towards something that's like bigger than themselves? I don't know. I say this a lot, and I think people usually think I'm joking, but like running a World of Warcraft rating guild was the single best preparation for being a manager.
I have used this in a ton of interviews. I still use it.
Probably should.
I learned, so common answer, USCD, talking to customers was really big for me. I didn't do that at all before, though I did many other parts of startups and product development. So talking to customers, probably the most important thing I learned. The thing I use most often is that I learned in college is kind of like, there aren't really any rules. Sometimes people will say that there are rules, but they don't really mean it if you're very charming. So.
I want to do one quick follow-up on that. Is there something that that you felt was missing, something that Olin could have prepared you for and didn't?
Wish I'd written a lot more code in college. Like, I wish that I had, I think the thing that was, there's like a certain level of technical competence you get to after which you can kind of solve any problem that gets thrown at you. And like, I don't feel like I got to that until I was a few years out of school. And I think if I had focused more on that earlier, I could have built more fun, cool stuff in school. But it's probably like 3 or 4 years into my career where I was like, oh, I can actually just solve anything. Like I can build anything I need to.
I wish there was more, so with the do-learn process where you do it first and then you learn about it, I feel like Olin really does this well with teams. You do everything as part of a team. It's like teams, working in teams. But I feel like there was never the explicit, like, here's some guidelines on working as part of a team that I think I would have actually really liked. It's like, yes, I work, and so I kind of figured out a lot of stuff, but also I feel like at Olin and outside of Olin, I've been a part of a lot of teams that weren't working well, and we just all sort of like tacitly agreed. It's like, okay, this one person's going to go do other things, and this person is going to do most of the work, and like, you know, and we would all just run with that, and I'm like, this seems really screwed up. And so, yeah, I wish there had been like some more like, I don't know, conflict resolution and like syncing things up and like kind of the explicit part of that, because I think we really did the implicit part.
I think to a large extent this is just the trade-off that Olin has to make given its size and sort of philosophy. But I do think that there is something you miss by not having like a large research institution around it in terms of just like exposure to a ton of other fields, and not just like exposure, but examples and people around you working at the cutting edge of those things. And I think that showed up when I was a grad student at MIT. I think that was like the first 3 months were kind of eye-opening in that respect. And I think that there are perhaps things Olin can do and maybe is doing now, I don't really know, to just expose people to that stuff more. Because I think there's sort of a risk if you don't see a lot of it, you don't really know it exists, and you can believe that it doesn't, which is narrowing.
I think one thing I noticed from those two questions is how broad they were. I think that's something really interesting, right? Where like Adam's focused a lot on like the technical things versus like teamwork and management. So I feel like, and you keep in mind these are like roughly the same degrees, and there's only like so many courses, and people had like very different experiences based on like what they chose to spend time on. I think it's really interesting. People told me that good panelists like to collect and gather and draw things. Sorry, I'm just trying to be as good as Bennett. Time for like 2 more questions since we got started late.
For the things that you don't know, how much do you seek advice or advisors? If you realize you're bad at business and pricing, do you seek a business advisor, or how much do you just try to figure it out on your own as you go, as we are wont to do?
I think seeking advice is a great way to level up quickly, but I think ultimately you have to get good at, unfortunately, everything. But I think like definitely tapping into people who are experts in something, like spending 45 minutes with somebody who's an expert in something will just like point you in the right direction and helps like narrow the scope of all the possible things you would have to learn. And usually they'll just be like, great, here's a book, read this book, you'll understand this as well as you need to. And they can just save you a lot of time. And I get a lot out of just talking to people and like bouncing questions off of them. But I think ultimately you have to learn everything to some degree, at least well enough to hire somebody who's better than you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the key. Like ultimately, for you to be successful, everything that's at all important to the business, you're going to have to know enough to hire somebody good and to manage them successfully, which almost always sort of naturally involves you trying to do it yourself first,
hopefully succeeding,
and hopefully succeeding. I actually think I think this is certainly not an uncommon answer, but there's a huge amount to be gained by reading stuff, and I actually think there's too much. It's too easy to read like blog posts and tweets and stuff like that. And I think that people have written really good books on almost everything that you're going to have to deal with. At least all the standard stuff that you're going to have to deal with. Like they're often. I mean, oftentimes for a company, there are some things that are like totally unique to you, which is what gives you a chance of working. So hopefully, those are the things that you're equipped to figure out best yourself. But for everything that's standard in any way, there's a huge amount out there that you can just read for free or for $2 on Kindle or whatever. Like,
I read most of a networking textbook in the first like 3 months that we were working on this company. So
Yeah, I think read it, but I'm really eager to advisors, like you said, that point you towards the right books. Or I'm like, look, I'm weak in this area and I want to get better at this. Like, what should I do? Or like somebody pointed me towards, there's like a management podcast or something. I'm like, great, listen to that. Like whatever it is, and kind of like level up that way.
I really like the reading list on the Parcel B Fellowship page.
It's a great reading list. Yeah,
good reading list. So Nick Hobbs.
Where you mentioned the like first 9 months of being a loaner, basically where no one might care about you is really hard. And why you mentioned that like finding where a market is. I guess I was curious, having gone through that, what do you think is good advice for getting through it? And in particular, what are things that you think you got through that you like had you encountered just in like executing before, seeing stuff before, being more?
I mean, for me, it was the like, it's like the performing without a safety net. Like being at any other company of any other scale, if you screw up, the company's not going to go under. Like there were like high risk projects I worked on at Square, but like worst case scenario, we're going to lose like $100 million and like probably wouldn't tank the company. And like but like the fact, like when you're working on something, you've got like 4 or 5 people in a room, you're like, if we don't get this right, we literally lose. Like that was just a different experience. I think, at least personally, like, I wasn't prepared for how much of a mindset shift that was. I thought I was because I'd worked on stuff that like gone from, oh, we have an idea and we build a product and we ship it, but the like not having a safety net at all was like a very different emotional experience.
I always want to use endurance sports analogies because I like endurance sports, and I always like stop myself from doing it. So I think I end up never doing it.
Do it. Live your best life.
But I think that was like, I love bike racing and running, and it's sort of tacky, but I think that experience doing that and just like sort of pushing yourself really hard and holding that for a long time was very helpful for me, because I think ultimately in a lot of these things there's no answer. There's no like magic thing that's going to happen. It's just, you just have to keep trying. Like you have to keep going and like learning as much as you can and like pushing whatever direction you think makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's all very hard. And so like celebrating things is important. So like at Roxbox, nobody wanted to invest in the company. Everyone was like, this isn't a good business. But our customers loved it. And we would get handwritten thank you notes in the mail every day, right? We would get cards. We would get like little gifts. People would like make their own version. They would like mimic the Roxbox out of like stuff in their kitchen and like send, it's like we got all this stuff all the time. And so we like framed it. When people posted on Instagram and they were like, I'm so obsessed with how much I love Rocksbox, we printed that out and like had it on the right. And so we were surrounded by how much people love the product. And so at a time when nobody loved the business, it was like, well, like, but people really love the product and I really want to bring this to life for them. At Pinch, it's like, well...
Sorry, I feel like that's just a total indictment of investors generally.
Go on.
Just that kind of product love didn't convert into like... Anyways.
Yeah,
that's probably
I have many thoughts on that. And then at Pinch, right, we have like far fewer customers, and they are not writing us handwritten thank you notes. It's a different customer base, but there are different things.
I see some of the tweets.
So sometimes there's some nice tweets, yeah. We don't print them out. We probably should. But I think anytime, like for me, it's like when it feels like nobody likes anything and there's no success. And Ducker really helps me to do this, actually. We reframe it so we're like, oh, success is learning, and what are the next steps that we can do so that we learn the most, right? So it's like, what feature can we build so that we learn the most? What like people can we talk to? What stuff can we read? What like whatever it is, it's like what is going to result in learning the most? And then, you know, you might learn, for example, that everyone hates that, and you're like, cool, this is a success. We learned so much.
Yeah, I mean, the learning, like, that is one of the things I really like about working at a startup and about starting a company is you just get to learn constantly on every possible front. It is, like, the fastest route to, like, personal growth and development that I've found. Stressful as hell, but you learn a lot of stuff really, really quickly.
Yeah, I almost hate to end the panel here because it's getting a lot of good questions, but one thing I want to close on, I'd be curious, how many people here have started a company? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. So I'm counting 11 out of roughly 40 people. How many people are planning on starting something concretely in the immediate future? Yeah, and like sort of vaguely in the future. Yeah, so maybe 10, 12. Yeah, so yeah, pretty entrepreneurial crowd. So one thing that I often tell students is I think you'd be surprised how often you can email an Olin alum and say, don't know you, never met you. I'm working on something kind of similar to what you're doing. I would love some advice. I'm not volunteering their inboxes to you, but always, I would say that works more often than you expect. And you can also always email team@parcelb.vc. And we are heading to Novella right after this. So if you want to ask some questions there as well. Oh, it's 21 plus. That is a snag I didn't think about.
I don't think they...
it's just recorded.
There's no rules. It's okay.
Cool. So yeah, exactly. So let's if you guys want to hang out for like 5 minutes, I think we'll huddle and figure out the right place to go. You know. And thanks so much everyone for coming.
Thanks.